Hello, everyone. Welcome back to our webinar series on using social media as a research tool. We're very pleased to have Kieran Caminella here today, who will talk about a new tool that he and his collaborator have developed to gather data from WhatsApp, which is one of the platforms we haven't talked too much about. So it's great to have WhatsApp also present, which is obviously a very important platform. Just to briefly introduce you to Kieran, Kieran is actually a computer scientist. He's currently based at Rutgers and had also positioned at MIT and Lausanne in Switzerland before, and got his PhD in computer science from the Aalto University in Finland. Kieran is a computer scientist, but is very much interested in kind of the big social science questions, polarization, misinformation, migration, these kind of topics. And as he says himself about his research, using digital data for social good. So that's really great. I think that's what a lot of us are also interested in not just seeing maybe these platforms as danger, but a way to harvest the power of it for the good. So as always, we have about 45 minutes for the talk. If you have questions, please put them in the Q&A function. I will keep an eye on these questions. If there's anything that is more clarification, I will disrupt Kieran briefly. Otherwise, we will just collect them and answer them all at the end. So with no further ado, over to you, Kieran.
Perfect. Yeah. Thank you so much. Thanks for inviting, and thanks for everyone being here. Okay, so let me talk about this data donation tool that we developed for WhatsApp. So the idea with this talk is this is ongoing work. So we developed and deployed this tool over the last 2 years or so. So the tool itself is ready and out there, and we've deployed it. So I'll show you instances of how we deployed it, what kind of data we could collect. But the actual analysis of the data and stats on, like, for instance, how much misinformation is on WhatsApp and things like that, they're still preliminary. We're in the process. So I'll show you some preliminary results from some pilot data, but it's mostly going to be about the data collection, which is very good for this sort of seminar series. Okay, so I think, okay, if you're all here, you know about WhatsApp, but still, like, WhatsApp, like Anya was saying, is highly understudied, but it's super, super, super important. It's one of the biggest social networks out there. It's also end-to-end encrypted, meaning that if I send a message to someone, only I and that other person can see the message. The platform cannot see the message, so which is very good for privacy, but also has a lot of other implications. Has over 2 billion monthly active users, or probably more. There are all these really staggering numbers, like especially in the global south, like countries like India, Brazil, and so on. Like hundreds of millions of people use WhatsApp. Even in the US, like where we talk a lot about like Twitter and other social media. WhatsApp is much, much more popular than Twitter, for instance. And recently Mark Zuckerberg revealed that around 100 million people in the US are using WhatsApp now. So it's a very, very important platform. Unfortunately, there's very little understanding of how things are on WhatsApp, especially in the context of how things like misinformation and polarization, hate speech, the dangerous stuff. And we really have no idea how bad things are on WhatsApp, even the platform. Like, so that's the key thing here, which is very different from other platforms, is at this scale, the billions of people are using it. Nobody knows, how things are, what is spreading virally on WhatsApp and things like that. And talking of like bad things, there is, pretext here, like some cases of, misinformation, for instance, leading to really bad stuff, like offline consequences, like where, dozens of people being killed and so on. So for instance, in India, there was this rumor about children being kidnapped that like really spread virally through WhatsApp. And that led to lots of people getting injured and getting killed and so on. The same rumor, the same video, which is about some strangers entering a village and kidnapping children, the same video actually then spread later in Mexico, again, which led to some sort of offline violence. So, and this is a context, and this is because, of encryption, where, WhatsApp knew that, journalists knew, everyone knew that this is the video that's causing these sorts of troubles, but nothing could be done because of encryption. Okay, so misinformation is one problem. Another bad thing on WhatsApp is the sort of political propaganda, political trolling, and things like that. Again, if you take the context of India or Brazil, there's been lots of evidence of political parties which are super invested and like have huge amounts of resources using and misusing WhatsApp. So, for instance, in India, one of the biggest political parties has used WhatsApp extensively. So they have like tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of WhatsApp groups through which they spread their political propaganda. Similarly, in Brazil, it's the same. In the Brazilian elections, the far-right party there used WhatsApp a lot for spreading their messaging. This is a very nice video I always show of person. He's showing the volume of WhatsApp messages they're getting on their phone. These are all groups on WhatsApp, and that person is Bolsonaro. So he's showing off like, oh yeah, I'm a part of all these groups, and I'm reading all your messages and things like that. So obviously he's not reading it, but this is an instance of like, okay, this guy really and his party have really used WhatsApp very effectively. Okay, so the current conversation on WhatsApp. And what can be done is, on the one hand, WhatsApp is saying, okay, there's encryption, which is very important. So we can't do anything, right? Like, so in terms of like cracking down on misinformation or even the bad stuff, like, child pornography and things like that. On the other hand, like governments, there was this instance, even, I mean, it's still ongoing. The UK government really claiming, okay, break encryption, provide us a backdoor. The Indian government is also one of those, like, it's kind of forcing WhatsApp to remove end-to-end encryption. Like there's this sort of discussion on what can be done, in this end-to-end encrypted context. But questions of like these, like, how much of a problem is this? Like, what can be done to prevent it? What is the prevalence of misinformation and other kinds of stuff? Like on WhatsApp, they don't have clear answers. And that's because data collection of WhatsApp is really hard. Like it's really, really difficult to collect data at scale from WhatsApp to answer these kinds of questions at a population level. So, and the key thing here is because of encryption, even the platform does not have access to this data, right? Like, so it's not like Meta can somehow say, okay, this is misinformation, we can stop this. There's no way to do that because of encryption, which is again, overall a net positive. So you really have to work within this context of like encryption and think of like solutions for this. And I think our research will try to kind of provide some basis for how bad things are on WhatsApp and like have a way for researchers like us to get this data and understand and study these kinds of issues. And the method that we developed for this is based on data donation, which is a privacy preserving opt-in model for data collection, meaning users actually opt in and say, okay, I'm giving you this data. And specifically, we are here interested in getting data from WhatsApp groups. So these are groups where groups of people, are part of a collective and like I don't know, group, and like so this is basically not individual conversations. So we are specifically asking people to donate the WhatsApp groups that they're a part of, and we're getting data from those. And the way we actually operationalize this data donation is through an on-ground survey. So we have an on-ground team which goes to various parts of India and Brazil. I'm mainly going to focus on India because that's where like we did this big study during the recent election last summer. Mostly going to focus on that, but we also had like a smaller pilot in Brazil. And I'll kind of compare some of the data points to the pilot in Brazil just to provide some sort of reference. In Brazil, this was done in Sao Paulo, the biggest city in Brazil. In India, this was done in, okay, this is India. This was done in this place in India, this region called Uttar Pradesh in the north of India. Okay, you might say, okay, why do I care about Uttar Pradesh? What is this? Like, this is like a very small part of a small region in India. Okay, yes, true. But Uttar Pradesh, this region here in orange has a population of over 230 million people, which is larger than all these other countries shown here in purple. So, it's because, it's big. It's not necessarily big, but it's, very, very populous. Lots of people in there. It's like the fourth largest country by population. Okay, so the way we do this is one of our contributions is this tool. It's called WhatsApp Explorer. This is a tool to collect private WhatsApp data, private WhatsApp groups, meaning these groups are not accessible otherwise, if not for the sort of data donation, in a legal, ethical, and practical way. So again, like, I don't see these like lightly. So there's a lot of effort done behind like each of these parts, like legal, ethical, and practical. The practical part being, some of the stuff that I'm going to talk about, like how do we operationalize this at scale? How do we collect data in a representative sample and things like that? Okay, so the way this works technically, WhatsApp Explorer is basically a clone of web WhatsApp. So if you use WhatsApp, you're going to sign on on your laptop or your desktop. You open web.whatsapp.com, you scan a QR code. So basically, what we did is we cloned that. Like, so we have a version of web WhatsApp running on our server, and people can donate their data through that. It's available at this, so it's currently behind a login, but if you're interested and you want to use this after this talk, let me know. We can, just talk, and like the code is open source, but I can also talk a bit more in the Q&A about the practicalities of this and deploying this yourself and things like that. Okay, how does it work? So basically, like I said, it's a clone of web WhatsApp. So whatever you do when you sign into web WhatsApp is exactly what you do here. So firstly, okay, this is done through an offline survey, right? Like we're on the ground. We go to a person's house, we explain to them the protocol thoroughly and the incentives. And then once they consent, we generate a QR code. This is like the same thing. You go to web.whatsapp.com, you generate it shows you a QR code. You open your WhatsApp, scan that QR code for linking your WhatsApp to your computer is the same thing. So you're linking your WhatsApp to our service, WhatsApp Explorer. It looks like this. So this is WhatsApp Explorer. You say generate QR code, and then a QR code is generated. Then you see a screen with a subset of the WhatsApp groups you're a part of. So a screen like this. So this is a bunch of WhatsApp groups that I'm a part of. And you can see that there are, some of the groups are selected by default. Some of the groups are not selected. Some of the groups are unselectable, right? Like, so we have a specific threshold for a group to be eligible to donate, right? Like, so these are large groups, and large is defined as greater than or equal to 5 members and with a sufficient amount of activity. So if it does not have at least 15 messages in the last 2 weeks, this is an arbitrary threshold that we came up with based on some pilots. And then you cannot, the group is not eligible. So basically, if this group, for instance, Rutgers group, has only 2 members, so it's not eligible. So users even cannot donate their data from this. And if it does not have a certain amount of activity, users cannot also donate that. And you can also exclude groups. So, there's a way for you to say, okay, I don't want to donate these groups. You can say, okay, I want to remove access, or I don't want to donate these. So users have that ability. Okay, so once they provide consent and they provide the list of groups, for each group that they provide us access to, we're able to get automatically data going back 2 months from the day they donate, data going forward 2 months. So this is the data, and this 2 months is again an arbitrary threshold that we set to limit the amount of data that we collect. This is not a technical limitation. We could potentially go back or go forward until the user also have a choice to remove access to us to our tool at any time. Like you can do with web WhatsApp, you can go to your linked devices, you can sign out, like you can do the same, and you can remove access to our tool. We also get network information. So who are who are in your contact list and who's in your chat list. And there's a lot of anonymization that is done. I'll talk about this in a bit. And then we have a small question. We ask about demographics and other things, but we also ask about what groups they donated and what groups they did not donate. So we know, for instance, if you unselected a group, we know the name of that group, and we ask them, okay, why did you not donate this group? Just so that we understand what we are capturing. And they are given some compensation. I mean, this is $10 in India. It was a bit more in Brazil. So here's how it looks on the field. So this person in red is the person who's donating data. So this phone here, the gold one, is where our WhatsApp Explorer is running. and the person in red is donating the data. He takes his phone, opens WhatsApp, scans the QR code, selects the groups, and then donates the data. So the whole process takes around 5 minutes or so. Okay, so one of the first things with this is, with any of WhatsApp data in general, okay, this is super private data. Again, we are claiming one of the contributions is that this is private WhatsApp data. How do we deal with concerns of ethics? So there are two types of concerns. The first one, which is the biggest one, is that not everyone provides consent in the group, right? Like, so if I'm donating a group with 20 people, I'm donating the group, but not everyone in the group is providing consent. So how do we deal with that? The one solution that we currently are, whatever data I'm going to show you has done is that we are only analyzing content that is forwarded many times. So this is a label that WhatsApp puts on a message. If you use WhatsApp, you can see, forwarded and forwarded many times. Forwarded many times means that the content was forwarded 5 hops from the original sender. So, I sent it to someone, they sent it to someone, they sent it to someone, and so on. So it's 5 hops. It's not 5 times, it's 5 hops. 5 hops on a network is usually a very large number of people. So the assumption here is that these kinds of content are potentially seen by a lot of people. This is viral content on WhatsApp. So this is one way we are assuming that even if we are analyzing a piece of message that was not consented potentially, this is because this was marked forwarded many times. This is viral content, and many others have seen this, and this is not a personal or a private message that belongs to that group from this person. The other concern is anonymization, like because WhatsApp is tied to phone numbers, and it's a group chat, and all of this. There's lots of personal information. We're doing a lot of anonymization. So all names, phone numbers, emails, any personal information is anonymized before the content hits our server. So no personal information is stored. So we have no way of contacting the person back and asking them something. So everything is stripped before the content is stored. We are also anonymizing faces in images before the content is stored. Is this enough? Like, it's not necessarily enough. Obviously, privacy, anonymization at this scale, especially in a conversational context, is very hard. But this is the best we could do, and we've done this. Okay, so now let's go to how do we do the sampling. So like I said, like one of the other contributions of this is actually deploying this at scale and like try to get like sort of population level estimates. So one quick and easy way for that would be to do random sampling. So you go knock on random doors and you get a random sample. But the problem with this was that, especially with this kind of a protocol where we had to have people who were active WhatsApp users, that was not the case. So we actually tried this, and what we realized quickly is that even though we saw these 500 million Indians use WhatsApp, in a lot of the villages we were going to, not a lot of people were using WhatsApp very actively. I mean, or had a smartphone, or had smartphone with internet, or a bunch of problems like that. So what we said is instead, like, let's try this sort of quota sampling, where we identified these popular users in a village through our networks. And then for each village, we set a quota and we sample quotas through them. So we have quotas for various demographic variables based on like age, caste, religion, gender. No, actually, we do not do gender. But this was a representative sample. So you can then reweight because you have the baseline estimates for based on census for each of these villages, and then we have a quota sample for each of those villages. So that's how the sampling was done. Okay, so one comment about this sort of data donation model is that we've now deployed this beyond these two contexts that I mentioned since we've done this in many other contexts. So US, Sierra Leone, Colombia, Indonesia, a bunch of them. I'll show you how much data we were able to get and what context we got this data from in these countries. And so this kind of model could potentially solve the problem of data collection on WhatsApp, doing this sort of like understanding of how and what things are spreading on WhatsApp. I think this kind of model could potentially have the power to do that. So let's look at some of the data that we could get from these different countries and different samples. So India and Brazil and Sierra Leone were offline, like meaning we had people on the ground doing the sampling. In Colombia, Indonesia, and US, it was done online. So, where we recruited participants online. I mean, these are all small samples. So it was all convenient samples. But India and Sierra Leone, the big ones, where we actually tried to do some sort of representative samples. But yeah, you can see, for instance, the numbers of groups or the numbers of messages. This is like a very large sample, so you can do like really good quantitative understanding of WhatsApp, which was not previously possible. So this is a good possibility with a tool like this. You can operationalize it in context that you are interested in, even at a small scale. Let's say in Colombia, you got like 65 people, but they donated like 600 groups. So that gives us like a first view at like, what kinds of things are widely spreading in these different contexts, right? Like, and our initial analysis shows like a lot of interesting things that are that WhatsApp is being used for. Like I think, which is, it opens up this sort of black box, and you can do a lot of different things with tools like this. Particularly in this talk, like I said, I'm going to focus on the India sample. So this is where we operationalized this in India during the elections last summer. So let me share like, what the sample looks like. Do you see the map? I cannot see you, so you see the
Yes,
map, right?
yeah, we see
Yeah,
the
yeah.
map,
Okay,
yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is how the sample looks like. So basically, like I said, like, so there's like 3,500 users overall. So each we sampled like 100 villages across this region. So this is Uttar Pradesh, across India in the north. And each dot here is a village, or like a place where we sampled. Most of these are villages. Some of them are like towns or like cities. And each location has around 350 people that are sampled according to some quotas. And this is how like the sample looks like, right? Like, some of these are close to Delhi. So this is like a semi-urban population. Some of them are like super rural villages. Some of them are like, Lucknow is like the capital of Uttar Pradesh. So some are like like second tier cities, things like that. We also have some coverage in terms of political coverage, like so support for the ruling party, opposition, and things like that. So there's lots of thought put into like how these were sampled, and like, so you can see there's some sort of geographic spread in this map, but there's also some things of demographic representativeness that I'm going to show you now. Okay, so first thing, talking about like what we got, like, what is the sample, and like setting the expectations correct. Like when I talk about representative samples, this is already group data. So this is like not individual conversation. So if you take the number of groups that people are part of, so this is comparing India and Brazil. So in India, roughly around, so this is groups with more than 2 members, so beyond individual chats. Around 16 groups per person on average. In Brazil, it's a bit more, 23. Out of that, the ones that are eligible for our data donation, which is groups with at least 5 members and at least 15 messages, this is already drops off, right? Like, but this is the one that is in our sample. So this is the number of groups that actually people donated. So out of the eligible ones, people can unselect. The good thing is people are not unselecting a lot, like, at most one group in Brazil and at most like half a group in India. So people are donating most of the groups, but you can see that, this is not a representative sample of all the groups that people are a part of. This is just a subset of the large groups with activity that people are a part of, right? Like, so that's the caveat about like, representativeness and all of that stuff, like, is that this is a very special sample, even though it's like a large and different kind of sample. Okay, so how did we do the recruitment? So this was done over this sort of 5-6 month period. I mean, the tool has been in development for almost 2 years now, and we've done a bunch of pilots and all of that stuff. Basically, the objective for all of this was to collect data during the elections. So the elections in India take place during a 6-week period. This is from April 19th to June 1st. So we wanted to get data during that time. And okay, obviously, we started in around April, started recruiting people. So the y-axis is a cumulative count of the number of people in our sample. And as you can see here, in the middle of the elections, our tool got shut down. And I mean, this is not specific to our tool. Like WhatsApp was cracking down on some automated activity and things like that during the election, and so it got shut down. And okay, that was a nightmare. But you can, yeah, if you've done any of these sorts of data collections, right, how much we depend on platforms mercy for this. Okay, but then we were able to figure out a solution. Then we eventually got the number of users around 3,500. And the good thing about this is that because for each user we get data going back and going forward, you can get like valid data, especially during the election. So because even if a user was recruited in July, like we get data going back 2 months, so we have like compute how many users will have valid data, and like during the election, most of the times, the number of valid users with more than was more than 3,000 at all times. So this helps us like get good data during the election that we can use to study various things about the election, but also other things. So this is the good news. I mean, there's bad news and good news, but okay. So then now I'll quickly go through coverage. So we have very good coverage, recent coverage in terms of various demographic variables. So in terms of age, we don't have the older population, but we have good coverage. Like around 70% of the data is below 44, which is what the WhatsApp usage in this context. Religion, we have both. We have oversampled Muslims in India. They're around like I think 20% or so in this region, but we've oversampled for good reason. In terms of education, we have good coverage. Like we don't have above bachelor's or below primary, but others we have good coverage. And a bunch of them. I don't want to go through them. Like, but in terms of residential type, we have small towns, cities, big cities, villages, and so on. So we have good coverage there. Income-wise, we have decent coverage. Okay, let me just spend some time on this. The content types. So what I'm showing you here is the modalities that we have in our data set. The top line result is that over 50% of the content is non-textual, which is really not your usual social network. Again, when we think of like social network research, we usually do text analysis, but here in this case, what I'm showing you is chat. Chat is text messages. The top 6 modalities. So these are chat is text messages, images, stickers, group notifications, audio and video. These are the top 6 modalities in the data set. So in India, 47% of the content is text content. The rest is all images, videos, audio, and so on. In Brazil, it's around 56%. So roughly on average, 50% of the content is non-textual, right? Like, so you have to think about how do you develop your analysis plans and things like that when you're dealing with this type of content. Interesting thing is, surprisingly, like in India, around 40% of the content is images, 23% in Brazil. So it's this huge difference, surprising, very interesting. In Brazil, there's lots more audio and video compared to India. Again, like very interesting. Okay, we also have data on virality. So content spreading, and WhatsApp keeps track of forwarded score. So how many times a message was forwarded, and they keep track only until 5. So a message can be forwarded. If I send someone a message, that's forwarded 0 times. If they send it to someone, that's forwarded 1 time. They send it to someone else, that's forwarded 2 times, and so on. After 4, 5 or more is marked as forwarded many times. So this is content that is what we call viral. So this is content that potentially many people have seen. This is viral content on WhatsApp. So this is around 1% of all the messages that we are also going to analyze and show you some results on. This is the content we are going to analyze. Another interesting aspect here is that the amount of forwarded content in our data set is much higher in India, surprisingly significantly higher, like 16% compared to 5%. Okay, so like I said, like I'll quickly show you in the next 10 minutes or so some results on like what we found with this data set. So the analysis on the full data set during the election is going on, but I'm going to show you results from some old pilot data from last year, or 2 years ago now, 1.5 years ago. This was around 10th of it was around 350 people, the pilot. So, it's probably not like representative and all of that stuff, but I think it directionally gives us some idea of like how the results are going to be. And also a first look at like misinformation at this scale on WhatsApp. Okay, so before I go into the results, just very quickly, one slide on setting the stage and setting the context, like others who have done work in this space on misinformation, like what do those numbers look like? So in terms of prevalence of misinformation, other large studies on like Twitter or Facebook have shown low single-digit prevalence, right, like around 2 to 5% prevalence of misinformation. So misinformation is usually, not a very common phenomenon. So it's around, in the low single digits. Prevalence of hate speech is very low as well. Like, according to Meta, like Meta has these transparency reports, almost non-existent on Facebook. This is because of obviously moderation and it's an internal number. So it's very and people can report and all that stuff. But also 2% on Gab. So Gab is this far right, no moderation, very little moderation social network. There's around 2% explicit hate speech on Gab. So also surprising for a platform like that this is this low. Then in terms of prevalence of political news and propaganda, so propaganda is a subset of political news, I would say. There's this large study in Science 2023 showing around 14% of adults, US adults, consume news. So again, like roughly just in the ballpark to get a sense of like how much news is consumed. So there's lots of caveats on this. Obviously, you cannot compare these numbers from Facebook or Twitter or Gab to WhatsApp. So WhatsApp is a very different kind of platform. Firstly, okay, encryption, so there's no moderation. Secondly, it's also a very personal platform. So there's no nature of like concept of influencers, things like that. It's mostly interacting with your family and friends. So the trust in content is much higher. There's lots of survey evidence on that. So there's differences, but I just wanted to set this stage just to give these numbers as a primer before showing you results on WhatsApp. Obviously, they're not comparable, but keep that in mind. Okay, how did we find misinformation? We actually put in a lot of effort into defining misinformation and like annotating misinformation, which is also in our ongoing annotation. Here, the misinformation was identified by an expert. I'll show you the expert in a second. So this was manually an expert annotated 2,000 pieces of content. All of these are viral content. This is content that was marked as forwarded many times by WhatsApp. And this is only 1% of the total content. So this is all pieces of viral content that spread during these 2 months, 2023, September, October, in our pilot data collection. And this is only 1% of the total sample. This was done by a trained fact checker. So this fact checker was part of the Meta third-party fact-checking program. Like they're this is their day job to do this sort of fact-checking. They did this sort of fact-checking for us. Okay, so the top line result is that 1 in 5 pieces of content, so 22% of the viral content was misinformation. So again, it's super high number. So 1 in 5 pieces of content is misinformation. In terms of prevalence of hate speech and propaganda, so I'm showing 3 columns here. Hate speech, pro-BJP propaganda, and BJP propaganda against opposition. So these 2 other categories, anti-BJP propaganda, propaganda which is against BJP, they're almost non-existent. So I'm only showing you these 2 categories here. So hate speech is around 8.5%. And propaganda is around like 7.4% is pro-BJP, or anti-opposition is 13%. So on average, around 10% is propaganda against the opposition or pro-government, right? And then we also annotated a bunch of the other categories just to identify and understand like what viral content is on WhatsApp. So out of these 2,000 pieces of content, what are the categories in there? So religious content is around a third, which is surprising. Entertainment is only around 11%. I would have expected like entertainment to be much, much more, but this was only 11%. Good morning messages, again, if if like there's lots of like messages where wishing people good morning. The surprising thing is these are all viral good morning messages. So these are not even original, like meaning, I got someone, I sent someone something, they forwarded someone, they forwarded someone, they forwarded to someone. Like, so, it's all forwarded many times. So it's very viral, meaning that, people are not even wishing each other. They're just forwarding. These are the good morning messages. Pawn is another, like around 2%, 1.6%. Obviously, it's the internet, but this is viral pawn again. Like, I sent it to someone, they sent it to someone kind of thing, which is surprising. Okay, so just a quick recap and looking at these numbers. So first thing is this 22% is really high, but it's only 1% of the viral content that we are talking about. So we don't know how rare it is. Like, maybe rare, right? Overall, like, I'm not saying that people are drowning in misinformation, that we cannot say that, but it's disproportionately viral. So out of the content that becomes viral, a lot of it is misinformation, which is really surprising, really shocking as well. Same with hate speech and propaganda. Again, like, out of the content that becomes viral, 8.5%, like, so 1 in 11 messages is hateful, 1 in 10 messages is propaganda. Again, like, really surprising. And the concerning thing is that this is organically viral. I mean, highly likely that this is organically viral, meaning the presence of automation and bots on WhatsApp is not well documented. It's almost, because WhatsApp is tied to a phone number, it's very well like, there's very little automation happening, and a lot of this, like, okay, real participants being exposed to this content. So this is all highly likely that this is organic virality, right? Meaning people actually forwarded this kind of content, and like hateful content or misinformation content being organically viral, that's a very dangerous, surprising thing. Okay, just 5 more minutes, quickly wrapping up. So we are in the process of doing this larger analysis of the bigger data set that we collected during our Indian election sample. So it's probably going to be tens of thousands of pieces of content that we are now annotating. We are trying to annotate different pieces of it in a way to get both like overall prevalence of misinformation, but prevalence in terms of viral content as well, and a bunch of other different types of samples. So we also want to move beyond description. Like, so, instead of just saying, okay, the amount of misinformation is X%, we want to do other things as well. So, firstly, yeah, this sort of providing data sets to the community. Hopefully, once we do some annotation, we might release some data sets. Then another work that we've done is estimating the reach of misinformation, because we have the network data. So we have the partial network. So we have each user and their contact network, and we have also the traces of content spread. Like, for instance, we observe messages in different groups at different times. So you see a message in group A at time t1, group B in time t2, group C in time t3. So you can construct and reconstruct these cascades using some heuristics, and then you can estimate like the breadth and depth of these cascades. Using that, because the group sizes, you can estimate the prevalence or reach of how many people were potentially reached by these types of harmful content. And one of the results here shows, I mean, it's a very complex plot, but if you look at this sort of purple line, that's misinformation. And this orange line is normal. So purple is misinformation that is viral. Orange is normal content that is viral. So, already misinformation reaches almost 2 times the number of people that normal viral content reaches. If you compare that to normal messages, which are not viral, so it's around 5 or 6 times lesser in terms of the reach of misinformation. Propaganda, hateful content have a much bigger average reach. So these are all average numbers here. And these are in the hundreds of thousands. So that in this sample indicates misinformation could potentially be reaching a very large number of people. The other thing we are doing now is just sort of studying the impact of elections on misinformation. Luckily, because we were able to collect data during the election, you can do things like this, where like, is misinformation and hate speech more during the elections? Do elections cause misinformation? And luckily, we have this sort of very nice design where the elections took place in 6 phases, and we have data before and after each phase. So for instance, if you take this map, these are the samples where we got data from. Let's say, there's elections here and elections here. They're taking place on different dates. So, this election in this region took place on April 26th. The election here took place on May 7th. So you can have the sort of nice comparison where, one, in their neighboring districts, but one district, the election happened, and the other it did not happen. So how did misinformation change, for instance? You can do these sorts of computation. You can also do a lot of interventions. So one thing we are doing now is, because you can do this sort of data donation, you can capture live what people are seeing. You can do some sort of fact checking. So you can send back information back to them, uh, which is a very powerful way of intervening, where you're actually intervening on misinformation exposure rather than on, some arbitrary headline coding tasks that people usually do for this misinformation intervention. So this is a very good thing that we are trying out now, where we have a loop where we ask people to donate. Then we have a fact checker in the loop that fact checks content every day. And if we know that someone got exposed to misinformation, we send it back to them, and we vary how we send this fact check back to them. And we are trying to study, like, for instance, if you receive the fact check from your friends, is it more effective or not? And then beyond WhatsApp, we are also developing data donation tools for other platforms. This is a paper that we just released. It's not, I mean, not publicly advertised it, but you can access it here. This is data donation tools for these 5 platforms: WhatsApp, Facebook, YouTube, Telegram, and Instagram, and a bunch of data sets from these platforms. So, browsing histories from YouTube, viral content from WhatsApp, and, other stuff, and along with demographics of users. So, you can kind of try to study, what are young white males getting exposed to on Telegram in the US, for instance. You can do this sorts of studies using these data donation tools and data sets. Okay, so that's it. Like, what I talked about is that encrypted platforms are important, and we developed this novel data donation technique. We developed a novel sampling strategy to collect representative data. And then now we're doing this sort of large scale effort to annotate and, identify content consumption. Uh, so one of the things is, there's a lot of work that went into this. And, when we started, Anya mentioned this sort of social good. We usually focus a lot on the negatives, like misinformation, but there's usually, especially in contexts like, these in the global south, there's so many positives that come with the use of social media. And there's a very wide adoption, but there's no baseline of what people are using it for, like how they're actually it's helpful. Like, some of these kinds of data sets, they're broad nets, right? Like, it's not just helps you to study misinformation, but a bunch of other things. So potentially there's lots of scope in deploying and understanding how people use social media for good using these tools. Yeah, thanks a lot. This is in collaboration with Simon Chowchar, the political scientist with UC3M. And yeah, we acknowledge funding from ERC, NSF, and Knight Foundation. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Kieran. That was a lot to take in. So let's just, jump in. I give you a moment to just take a little break. And I will just read out the first question. Please feel free to put more questions in the Q&A. So the first question is, could you briefly explain the process if we want to try out this tool? So, obviously this is something that you developed. So, this person asked, whether they missed something, like kind of what kind of data is donated, and what kind of group data, and how does it kind of really work? Is that kind of public available then, or kind of how do you do that? Or is it really just like something that you collect as a researcher and analyze it? And then also you mentioned there at the end a potential interaction that you as a researcher can actually go back to the group and say, careful, this was misinformation. Does that mean that you're basically added as a new group member, or how does that work? So maybe you can just go over that particular part again about how to that donation process works and so on. Yeah, I think people will be quite interested in that.
Yeah. So so this tool is public now, meaning the code for deploying this tool yourself is public. So if you're, but in reality, that means you need to have like some technical know-how of like setting this up or an instance of this on your own servers. I think it's very well documented, so you should be able to, like, with a good amount of effort, be able to replicate and deploy this tool yourself and like tweak it for your own requirements. So the tool itself is public, but yeah, it requires some sort of know-how for deploying this. And once you deploy it, like let's say, this Sierra Leone thing we said was not done by me and Simon, it was done by some other economists. And they took our tool, deployed it for their own, tweaked it for their own. So you can do this, you can deploy your own instance, and the code to do this is public. Like, so if you just send me your GitHub ID, I'll add you to the code base and you can clone it and deploy it and use it however you want. So the way this works is, okay, once let's say you deployed your own instance, then you can have a way for people to sign in and say, I consent, or you can develop your own consent process, and you can, there are these modules that you can swap. You don't need to follow our consent process. And then based on that, you can ask participants to donate their data, and you can choose what data they will donate. So basically in our process, what we're doing is once the instance that we deployed is like, you log in, you select, okay, I consent, and then you scan a QR code and you donate the groups that you are a part of. And the rest of the data collection is automated, meaning once you consent and donate, it takes like 5 minutes of your time. And after that, all the data collection is done automatically until like, there's this sort of 2-month before and after period, after which your access is automatically revoked, or the user can automatically can at any time say, I revoke my access. So this is how it works. And like, so basically then all the data from these groups that you consented is being logged, like it's being stored somewhere. In our case, it's on our servers. In your case, it will be on your servers. Yeah, so that's the process. Okay, so in terms of the protocol, like, so almost all of what I described, except the one in the end, we are doing this anonymization where we don't keep the ID of the participant in our, like, we don't have the identifier, so we cannot contact them back. But this last piece I mentioned is ongoing new work where we explicitly got consent from the participant to contact them back. Like, so in our original protocol for the Indian election data, we did not have that consent, so we did not do that. But for this specific case, we have consent. Like, it's a different study in a different region in India where we have consent to contact them back. So we don't have access. I mean, we have access to the group, but we don't have access to post in the group. We only have read access to the group. What we are doing is contacting the participant back. Like, so if you donate a group and you receive misinformation in that group, we are saying, okay, you donated this group and you might have been exposed to this content through this group. So we send them back a message on WhatsApp. So personal message, not a message in the group. It's a message to that person. So this is how it works. Yeah.
Okay. Can you maybe say a bit more about what kind of data you're actually harvesting there? So what, when you say you have access to all the data in the group, what does that mean?
Yeah.
Like, for example, I mean, you had the information about kind of how often something was forwarded, but given that WhatsApp only kind of highlights the, those posts that have been forwarded 5 or more times, right? But like, would you have like metadata on anything that was forwarded that doesn't have that kind of classification and so on? So maybe you can just kind of go over exactly what is harvested from with the tool.
Yeah. So once you donate a group, what we are getting is everything from that group. So all the messages that were sent, who sent it, when, which group, like, all of that we are able to capture. So you can choose to keep whatever metadata you want. We are keeping everything, including the sort of forwarded information. So how many times the message was forwarded, who sent it, in what group, at what time, the actual content of the message, if it's an image or a video or audio or documents, we're downloading those pieces of content. So you can download, like, you basically, it's like, if you're accessing the thing on web WhatsApp, you're able to load your chats and you're able to see the content. This is exactly what we can also see. Like, we can actually download all of that onto our servers.
There's a question about ethics, and just to kind of clarify again, and you talked about this, but so you talk to one member of a group, you ask them, would you donate your data? They say yes, but other people in that group do not know that their data is basically shared, right? Is that correct?
No,
And
yes,
I mean, that obviously raises questions, right, about kind kind of, yeah. So what do you say to that? Like, how do you handle this?
Yeah, yeah. So that's a big concern in our protocol. So the way we are handling that, like I mentioned, is we are only analyzing. So all the analysis that I showed you is on content that has been marked as forwarded many times. So this is content that is potentially viral that many, many others have seen. So let's say you and I are in a group and I donated to this, using this tool. So you didn't consent, but your message, the message that you sent, that is marked as forwarded many times. So the assumption there is analyzed. So, if you send a message in that group that is marked as forwarded many times, it's part of our analysis. And the assumption there is that, because the message is forwarded many times, it's definitely not a message that you sent to this group only privately. It's a message that you received somewhere else that you forwarded here, and that has already been forwarded many, many other times. So that's the idea of like that's one of the ways in which we are mitigating this aspect.
But you mentioned there at the end, right? Your next steps are to go beyond those viral content, which of course is, I mean, that's just 1% of the data, as you said yourself. So in the future, you want to go beyond that. So how do you deal with that then?
So we are like whenever we are getting we are getting explicit consent when we go beyond that. Like so basically, if we are analyzing and releasing any of this data, it will definitely be on based on consent from these other participants as well.
Okay. Um, the next question relates to kind of getting consent, when talking to people. So can you maybe say a bit more about kind of how you convince people to take part? And then also what were the reactions? Like, did people kind of give reasons why they wanted to be part of this or sometimes why they didn't? And I was also wondering, in your experience, what was the proportion of people actually agreeing and or not agreeing? Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So in our case, the response rate was surprisingly high. I think in India it was around 40%. Maybe it's in the higher side. Like usually you don't get this sort of consent rate, but that was probably because we did a bunch of pilots and we decided the incentives based on having a better uh, consent rate. So, most of the participants that we approached, 44 out of 10 would say yes, which is still a very high number for this type of data. So I think the biggest contributor to this was just the compensation. So a lot of the motivation comes from the compensation. People who did not consent obviously had issues with privacy, and I mean it's more than privacy. Usually, people were concerned about scams, especially in these parts in India that where we went to. One of the biggest concern was trust in some random survey firm that was approaching them. Like they did not know or if they could trust this, and that was one reason why we did this sort of sampling through influencers. These are people who you trust, and so that could also have contributed to a higher proportion of people consenting.
Can you maybe just briefly talk a bit more about this process, like of identifying the influencers and then sampling from there? And also, I'm not sure whether you mentioned that did you work with a survey company on the ground, or who were the kind of enumerators who kind of approached people and so on?
Yeah. So in India, all the part that I mentioned here, the actual study was done on the field by a survey firm. Like so, these are people who would go on the ground. Like so, there's a survey firm that we contracted. So these are people who are trained in the consent process, and then they go and actually operationalize this. In terms of how this thing with the influencers works, is basically, I mean that also, I showed you this sort of map where we selected these villages. Part of it is also convenience. So where we knew someone who could then help us get the sample from these regions. So it was all done through our contacts, and a lot of it is the survey firm contacts in these places. So that is how these people were identified.
But then the influencers kind of forwarded a message from you to
No,
the
yeah.
or how did that then happen?
So basically, yeah. So we then firstly, our survey firm identifies, okay, do we know anyone in this village, and do they know anyone that might help us recruit people? So then we reach out to them. we compensate them and we say, explain to them, and they do the recruitment. They say, okay, we know these people, so usually it's mostly like they make some phone calls and say, okay, hey, there's this survey that's being done. Are you interested? And that sort of thing.
Okay. Yeah. Okay, we have one more question. Does your tool also include functions to analyze the donated data, or is that up to the researcher to figure out?
So we have a dashboard that we're also releasing as part of our the tool, where so the process is like you do this sort of donation, and the data is being collected, and then it's all aggregated, and the dashboard is created automatically to show, display the data, like what is virally spreading, for instance. But it's very basic, so it just helps us in monitoring if the data collection is going on, like how much content we're getting, what kind of content we're seeing, things like that, but it does not help us. And we're using some of those tools in the annotation process, but not, it's not an one solution for like analysis. So it's not, does not, I mean, it's one kind of tool that helps in looking at the data, but it's not a data analysis tool.
We have one more question. Is the advantage of your tool that you can collect data into the future? Because once they install it, right, it kind of allows you to get the data, live, rather than looking at kind of past content, where you just kind of download, you export the chat data. Would you say that's the advantage, or?
Yes, so it's definitely an advantage in certain types of studies. The disadvantage with that is like in reality, what happens is like around 40% of our participants just deactivate immediately after our survey. The person leaves, so we only have like data going backward, not data going forward. So you pay them and you get the data, like you get the consent, and so the protocol says, okay, you can get data two months going back, going forward 2 months. But in reality, what happens is many people just, after they take the money, they'll just say, okay, deactivate, like, or remove access. So we only potentially get data going backwards and not forwards. But yeah, it's very helpful to actually get this sort of live data, because you can develop then some sort of interventions where you're actually monitoring and getting live data.
Yeah. I mean, I guess for this kind of design, you might have to also then have different incentives, right? Which is like, we give you some money to join and we give you some money at the end when we're done, or something like this. So that there is an incentive for people to stay in. Okay, I think that that's all the question answered in the chat. I didn't have anything else either. I mean, maybe just kind of, I mean, it was a bit surprising, to see these huge differences in terms of misinformation between the more public platforms and this more private setting. I mean, of course, we're still talking just about the viral content, right? But still, I mean, the viral content might be a bit closer to what, I mean, that's also what you conceptualize it, right? That is more like, that's partly public because everybody's kind of just forwarding it. So, I mean, what do we learn from this? I mean, would you then say that this kind of, end-to-end, encryption is not a good idea, because that just, leaves the room that more misinformation can spread, in that kind of behind the door setting, and, because it will reach so many people still. Can it really be a source of good, or actually the results are worrying and it's more like, maybe it's not good what's happening on WhatsApp?
Yeah, I mean, that's something that I'm very, very careful about, like when thinking and talking about this is like, okay, I mean, my stand on this is encryption is overall really good. So we don't know, like, overall prevalence, right? Like, so that's why you cannot really say if this is encryption is the cause of, like, no moderation is the cause of all of this, like, because we don't, like, we are talking about 1% of 20% of 1%. So that's, 0.2%, right? So of overall content being misinformation, we don't know, in general, if you take non-viral content, how much it is. So it's not something that we should definitely be worried about. Like, one thing is, because this is a first look, and if you take, viral content on Facebook and you find that 20% of that is misinformation, that's already worrying, right? So definitely there is concern here. And this is not just an India problem. Like we did this also in Indonesia, Colombia, in the US, and everywhere it's around this sort of 10 to 20% range of viral content being misinformation. So there is definitely a misinformation problem on WhatsApp for sure. And like lack of moderation, obviously, contributes to that, but there's so much other benefits that come with that, that, maybe this sort of 10% or 20% being misinformation is not the biggest concern. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, not gonna solve that question today, but it's definitely interesting to open that black box of WhatsApp and let us look, inside what is going on these platforms, especially in these crucial times of elections and so on. So thank you very much, Kieran, for sharing your tool with us, introducing it, and I hope that other people find it helpful to maybe be able to, maybe you can send around an email or something with kind of where to find the resources for people to kind of then use themselves. With this, we're done with the winter sessions of this webinar series, but we already know that we're definitely going to have 2 or 3 sessions in the spring, which we're probably going to schedule in kind of second half of May, early June, and so on. So stay tuned. We're going to send around an email again to let you know more about this. Yeah, and again, thank you so much, Kieran. And please do send me the slides so that we can also upload it to our website.
Cool.
Great.
Thanks a lot. Yeah, thank you so much. Bye.
Thank you.